So I was recently watching the Under the Mirror video on Killbug, and I thought I'd check it out because I haven't played an arena shooter in a while, and it's made by an indie studio, and as an aspiring indie developer myself, I thought it'd be interesting to check out what other people in similar situations are making. But I was shocked by the quality of the experience that I had, and I think you can really tell the love and precision that was put into every game design decision that was made when creating this game, and that's why I really wanted to talk about it in this video. So for those of you who don't know, Killbug is a surprisingly simple arena shooter where you only have one gun, which is an SMG that does medium damage from all ranges, and you have a melee attack which does high damage at a close range, but it pulls you in the direction that you're aiming, so you can get a bit more range out of it, and you can use it as a dash as well, which is very helpful. And the melee is actually probably the most important part of the entire experience because it's used for every other aspect of the game. For example, it's the main way to get back ammo is by the melee attack on any enemy, and it's the only way you can get back health is by getting kills with the melee, so it's very important. The other thing that makes this game special is that every time you play, enemies will spawn at the same time in the same locations, which allows you to plan ahead. And when you first hear that game design concept, you'd think that would make a very boring game, as every playthrough would be exactly the same, so you'd get very used to the opening parts when you die, and that could lead to very tedious gameplay. But actually the exact opposite happens, because the more you play this style of game, the more fun it gets, because you have to understand that the waves and the enemy layout will be designed with this in mind, so it doesn't end up being boring. In fact, it's what makes Killbug so fun, because every time you play through, you can start making plans and decisions around your knowledge of what's going to happen in the future, and this form of almost perfect information allows you to make plans and execute upon them, which is one of the most satisfying parts of gaming in general and makes Killbug a very satisfying game to play at a high level. An easy example of this is very early on in the game, where I know that there will be a trail of spider eggs that are going to spawn, and I already have a route in my head that I can use to go through and kill them all before any of them hatch, and this means that I don't have to deal with the spiders, which saves me a lot of health going into the next part, which can be quite intimidating when you don't have a high health ready. And like I said, doing this was extremely rewarding to me as a player, because it felt like I was progressing through the game and that my experience was actually meaningfully impacting my gameplay. Another benefit of the near perfect information you get from this style of game is that the player accountability for each death is increased to almost 100%, because you're not going to get an unlucky spawn, and you're not going to get killed by any RNG, because everything is set in stone from when you start, so the only thing that impacts the gameplay is you as a player. And that is extremely addictive, because I know that the reason why I died is just because I'm bad, and that means that I can strive to try and get better and improve my skill at the game, which is at the end of the day what you want as a game developer. Nothing is worse than being killed by something that felt like it was out of your control and thinking that the game is the fault that you lost and that your skill wasn't an issue. But by holding the player completely accountable, it means that the skill of the player is the only thing holding them back, and that just really drives any kind of player to try and increase their skill at the game and makes it feel a lot less like you're banging your head against a wall. And I think the developers of Killbug really realized that this is the main benefit of this style of gameplay, because every other aspect of the game really leans into this sense of learning and improving as you go. For example, the tutorial is very surface level and doesn't really tell you any of the game's mechanics other than the controls, but by throwing the player into the deep end, they get to learn how everything works themselves. They get to learn that they can use a sword to reload, they get to learn that they can use a sword to get more health, they get to learn that they can do a charged pistol attack by boosting from the ground. Giving the player the chance to learn these things on their own not only makes them feel smart when they uncover it, but it also really increases that sense of progression, because if you gave them all those tools at the start, fluid use of them wouldn't feel like so much of an achievement as just something that was expected from them at the start. Another thing that really leads into the sense of learning and progression that Killbug has is how they turned all of the what would be static objects in a game into enemies that the player has to learn to defeat in ways that reward them the most. For example, instead of having health packs around the level, the centipedes are the main way that you can get health back, as every time you kill one of the body segments, it gives you a chunk of health. So by slicing them at the head, you kill all the body segments and get a massive boost in health. But of course, by killing the centipede, the head can still come at you and get all of that health all the way back down. So the player has to master how to kill the centipedes in order to get their health back, and by doing that, even just getting health that would be a passive action in most games becomes a sense of achievement that the player gets when they master it in their runs. And then having them as an enemy can even lead to interesting strategies, like hitting the centipede so that it chases after you before going into a big attack. So that means that you have a health pack basically following you around when you need it. And interesting strategies like that you can develop as a player doesn't exist in other games which don't have this design philosophy. Another example of this is how the exploding bugs replace exploding barrels, meaning that what starts off in the game as an annoying enemy becomes a useful tool that's required for you to get a good run. Showing the player how these clever systems can be used to their advantage lets them know what the skill ceiling is for the game very early on, and this means that they can strive to reach that skill ceiling, which is good because if the player didn't know the depth of the combat going in, they might not realize what the game has to offer and stop at just the surface level of combat. It's really rare for me to think that a game is genuinely faultless, and when I was first playing I did think to myself that more options would be welcome, but at some point, the combat loop just clicked in my head, and I entered the fun zone that the developers had in mind, and I realized why they made every decision that they made, and given the chance, I wouldn't change any of it. I think the game is genuinely perfect. If I had to say one thing, I'd say that charge shooting the exploding bug should give a bigger blast radius, but it's such a minor nitpick and it might be overpowered anyway, so I'm not sure if it even is a good addition. It's so rare to see games this good, and at only £5, I think that everyone who likes arena shooters should definitely pick this up. It's definitely the best game that's been released so far in 2023, and it's the only game that can really scratch that arena shooter itch for me right now. So yeah, massive recommendation. Even if it looks a little bit interesting to you, I definitely recommend getting it. But that's going to be all for this video.
See ya.